see here. We're going to rotate who answers the questions first. We'll start with alphabetical order of the last name. So Councilmember Conlin, you'll answer this question first, okay? Reliable access to healthful, nutritious, and culturally appropriate foods, particularly for those living with chronic conditions, leads to improved health outcomes and a reduction in institutionalized care. How can the city help ensure that residents have access to the quality foods and meals they need to stay healthy?
Do I leave this in or take it out?
What's that? No, leave it in, please.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. One of the things that's most important for us as a city is to work on issues around hunger and malnutrition, childhood obesity, all of those things that are connected together. Obesity and hunger are two sides of the same coin. They're the sides that say if you don't get enough good food, then you wind up eating more. So that's a big problem. The issue of people who have specific nutritional needs and specific needs that they have to have met is something that we work on very closely with programs like Lifelong AIDS and other programs that provide home delivery of meals. We also provide support for food banks. One of the things that I was really proud of as a council member was that in the face of the recession, when we had to cut tens of millions of dollars out of our budget, we maintained every single human services program intact. And not only that, but we added money for programs, particularly those around food and nutrition. We added money for food banks. We added money for home delivery of meals. One of the things that I've been working on is to try and get better healthy meals to people, and we've done a couple of things that have helped with that. One is we created a Healthy Corner store program. We recognize that people don't always have access to healthy foods in their communities, and it's not easy to get a supermarket to locate in communities. So we went out and talked to stores all around low-income communities to try and help them figure out what they need in order to be able to have fresh, nutritious food. And we were able to get a lot of them to actually get the refrigeration, get the other kind of equipment and things of that nature that they needed. Finally, I want to mention the Fresh Bucks program. Fresh Bucks is a program that doubles the value of food stamps at farmers markets. I got the city to invest in this program, so it is now in every single farmer's market in the city of Seattle. 17 markets. That's the kind of thing we need to do in order to ensure that people have access to food and access to healthy, nutritious food for all their needs. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here. I'm not really sure as an economist what numbers Mr. Conlin is using, because actually since the recession, it's clear for anybody to see that problems with food access, homelessness, poverty, low wages, unemployment have only skyrocketed. And the reality is that first we need city council and city council members who will give their full and total commitment, no cuts to local emergency food investments. That's the first step. And then the second step is to realize that when you look at the small print of how the city and many of the city council members do their budgeting, it's all robbing Peter to pay Paul. So if you go and lobby for food investment, food emergency investment, then they'll take it away from some other shelter or some other program, after-school program or something like that. So the reality is that we are living in a very wealthy society. Seattle especially is home to some of the most profitable corporations. We first need somebody to have the courage to say, tax the wealthy, tax the big corporations, make full funding available for social services, and make big investments in transit. And last but not least, let's fight for a $15 an hour minimum wage, because low wages is the biggest obstacle to all this.
Okay. Absolutely think it's appropriate to let your voices be heard in praise of somebody. Let's not spend any energy kind of shouting anybody down tonight, though, okay? So we're gonna let them speak. That's why they're here. So I want to praise is good, shouting down, let's skip that. Question 2. Kshama, you'll be first on this one. Despite Seattle's investments in ending homelessness, which include building and rehabilitating housing, transitional housing, rapid rehousing, overnight shelter, and basic services, there are still at least 2,000 people who lack basic overnight shelter every night. How should Seattle City Council respond? Please talk specifically about where the city should invest to provide safe daytime and nighttime places for people who are homeless.
Homelessness is not only a Seattle-wide question, it's a nationwide question. It is something that is exploding. It's a problem that is exploding. And the roots of homelessness are within the roots of our capitalist society itself, which creates unemployment, which creates poverty in the face of obscene wealth expanding on the other side. Recently, the numbers that were released, the top 1% and the top 0.1 of 1% making enormous amounts of wealth after the recession, while the rest of us are getting pushed down. So we need a broad-based and fundamental shift in the way policies are made. So that's absolutely something that I want to mention, because I'm not there just to tweak one small program here and one small program there. I'm there to have everybody's voice heard for a systemic change in the way funds are allocated. But having said that, the first point to make, in terms of immediate needs, tent cities and tent encampments are a really necessary stopgap measure to help homeless people. And Mr. Conlin voted to end Nicholsville, and he voted against a measure that would allow the city to ease its regulations against, regulations on homeless encampments. Mr. Conlin also voted to criminalize panhandling, something that the Seattle City's Human Rights Commission said that's absolutely inhuman. Not that you need a Human Rights Commission to tell you that criminalizing homelessness is inhuman, but, so what we really need is somebody who will stand up for ordinary people, for the poor, for low income, not for big business and the real estate developers. We've had enough of council members doing that. Now it's time for a dramatic change in the voice in the city council.
Thank you. Appreciate that applause. So when we talk about homelessness, it's important to understand that there are many different reasons why people become homeless. There are a lot of different things that cause people to go into homelessness, and we need to approach each person with dignity, with care, and with the kind of services that they need in order to be able to get back into society, back into homes, get the kind of social services and support they need, and the jobs and employment that they need as well. One of the things that's most vital and important to that is our low-income housing levy. I was very proud of the fact that this council significantly increased the low-income housing levy, and the voters of Seattle have responded to that. It's pretty extraordinary when you think about it, that people have been willing to tax themselves to fund housing for people who are of low income. That's an extraordinary achievement for the people of Seattle, and we should be very proud of our voters. We need to go beyond that. We need to make sure that we continue to provide the kind of shelter space that is important for people who are in transition, but we also need to acknowledge that shelter is transitional and that people need to be moved out of that into housing. And rapid rehousing is the best way in which to find ways in which to get people out of the cycle of homelessness and into the places where they need to be. A couple of particular examples. Victims of domestic violence are often the kind of people who lose their homes, lose access, and yet can actually come back very quickly into society if they're provided with the kind of counseling assistance and rapid rehousing that they need. We've piloted programs to take people who have been victims of domestic violence, help them find a way in which to get out of that, put them back into housing, provided them with safety, security, and shelter, and we found that it works really well to get them back into society. Another really critical issue is that of young people who are homeless. And I'll just mention very quickly that particularly LGBTQ homeless youth often come into the city because they are rejected by their homes. They have to leave the rural areas or small cities where they do not find a home. We support Roots Shelter. We support other shelters like that in ways in which will help these people find their dignified place in our society.
Question 3 of 3. Richard Conlin, you answer first to this. What policies will you advance to address the growing economic inequity in Seattle?
Economic inequity is not just a problem in Seattle. It's a problem around the country. As the recession hit, people went down, and many of those people have not come back up again. We are putting people back to work, and that's a really important part of the way in which we come to recovery. Seattle is doing well on that. Our unemployment rate has gone down below 5%, and we need to continue working on economic strategies that will help people find jobs, find employment, find education, get the skills they need in order to put them back to work. That's the number one task that we have. The second task is to look at ways in which we can reduce inequality. And there are lots of ways in which we can do that. The state of Washington has the highest minimum wage in the country. We're just about to be passed potentially by California, which has passed a law that will increase their minimum wage. We need to take a very careful look at whether the opportunities for us to increase the minimum wage here. I've been working with SEIU on strategies in which we can start having that discussion, begin bringing in small businesses, many of whom have real issues about how you're actually going to approach that. Bring in people from the labor community, the business community, all of the folks who have a stake in this, and help them to figure out ways in which we can move this forward. Challenging poverty is also something that we can do by the right kind of housing and transportation strategy. When people have to spend money on transportation because they can't find affordable housing in the city, that's something that leads them into further problems with economic stratification and with not being able to survive effectively. So we need to provide housing that's accessible to transit. Just this Thursday, the Capital Committee of Sound Transit gave its final approval to a development agreement for the properties that Sound Transit has around the Capitol Hill Light Rail Station. That development agreement the city negotiated provides 36% of the units that are going to be developed are going to be affordable housing, from the very low, 30% and below, to 80% workforce housing. That's the kind of strategy we need to have in order to ensure people have housing, and I will continue to work for those things in the future. Thank you.
I think the question on economic inequality is absolutely the most central and essential thing we need to talk about. But I also think we need to be aware as enlightened voters of two-faced political rhetoric in an election year. Mr. Conlin says he supports he's talking about $15 an hour, but just last week he said, standing right next to me, that he does not support $15 an hour minimum wage in the city. And it's easy to pay lip service for an issue that voters are excited about in an election year. It's much harder to actually fight for it, because in order to fight for something like $15 an hour minimum wage, you need to stand boldly against corporate interests and say, I really don't care what they think, I'm fighting for working people and low-income people. And do you know why I'm able to do that? Because I don't take any money from big corporations, not 1 cent. And Richard Conlin has taken thousands of dollars from downtown developers, other real estate agencies, and also big corporations like BNSF. And the other thing that we need to do in order to address economic inequality is the question of rent. Rents are skyrocketing. I am calling for rent control in this city, which is the only measure that will address this massive and obscene speculative investment by real estate corporations, which is why the rents are going up. Don't believe those people who say it's just supply and demand. It's not just supply and demand. It's price gouging. And people are getting redlined into the outskirts of the city. If you look at the way the South Lake Union rezoning happened, Richard Conlin stood against every effort made by council member Nick Licata to actually increase the in lieu of fees so that affordable housing is put in place. Again, in terms of transit, Richard Conlin has stymied transit at every step of the way. Reality is, if you want to fight for a higher minimum wage, if you want to fight for rent control, if you want to fight for affordable housing, we need to do it together ourselves as grassroots people. That's the only way this can happen.
Okay. We have our 1-minute closing statements now. We have a 1-minute closing statement. Kshama, you're first.
So I just wanted to say that, I can predict one of the things that is going to come after me is the point that, rent control is outlawed by the state, so, it's easy to make promises. It's easy for Kshama to make promises, but this won't work. But guess what? Everything was illegal. It was illegal for black people to come to the front of the restaurant. It was illegal for gay people to marry. It was illegal to have medical marijuana. We changed those things, and we can change this too. But what it requires is for us to be out on the streets in mass movements, and for us to have a voice in city council that genuinely represents us. And I also wanted to mention that I have gotten arrested trying to prevent the foreclosure of one of my fellow citizens. It's high time. We've had lots of people who talk the talk. It's high time we had somebody who walks the walk on city council.
I'm proud to stand before you on my record. I've been endorsed by the King County Labor Council. I've been endorsed by SEIU 775, the people who are working on income inequality. I've also received the Hunger Fighter of the Year award from Food Lifeline for my work to challenge hunger. I've received the Take Action Award from the King County Coalition Against Domestic Violence for my work to combat domestic violence. One of the things that was most important about that was when I got funds for immigrant victims of domestic violence to have legal assistance so that they would be able to avoid having the threat of deportation over their head when they reported domestic violence to the police. I also was named Social Justice Visionary by Casa Latina, the program that works for undocumented immigrants to provide them with homes and dignity. I've been working with them for over 10 years to make sure that they got a place in the community. I've been out and working in neighborhoods to make sure that people have the opportunities that they can have in order to get social justice in this city. I really appreciate your support. I look forward to the next 4 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay.